So now that we've been doing, a lot of the larger church plant conferences, exponential, stuff like that, most of the inquiries the last couple of years have been people saying, hey, tell me how you guys survived, because it sounds like you were bivocational. And so I just started to see pretty incredible, I guess, interest in that. I also last year at a breakout at Exponential with about 400 people, I said, how many of you are right now Bivo? And it was about 300 of them. So I went to Todd, who runs Exponential. I said, hey, did you ever think that maybe over half of the people that even come to these conferences are Bivo, but nobody's ever helped these poor people, We've just assumed that they, what we put on the stage is the mega people, right? Who not only have the full salary, but they have tons of paid staff, but we're not addressing the real life issues of, the fact that the church is declining. So anything that's built upon the business model of the church, and I don't say that negatively, but there's been one primary business model for last 60 years, 80 years, and that is that people would come to faith. We would teach them how to tithe. They would consolidate resources inside the church, and then the church would primarily be the ones that spent the money, right? And that actually has done a really good job for a season. Like, if you think about what's happened on, like, global missionary sending, a lot of that came out of that money, right? Early on, hospitals, schools, a lot of those things that we now, we Christians built all that stuff. Yeah, that was based on the consolidation model. Bring it into the storehouse. The top leaders will figure out how to spend it. So if that would have kept going, if we had kept leading people to faith and discipling them that way, then they would have probably been loyal to that business model. But now that you see the decline, that means everything hinged to that business model. If that primary model goes down, everything will go down with it. Seminaries, Bible schools, denominational retreat centers, denominational positions. So anything that's tied to that will naturally, and that, how many of you are experiencing that right now? You know people that they've been faithfully sort of been the preachers at a church, but now they're 50 and the church can no longer support them. They never learned to trade. I mean, I've had one friend said, look, my only skill is God. I don't know what to do outside of that. And he's a great guy. And he was a great leader, great pastor, but the church just didn't reach anybody. You also have sociological issues going on with the younger generation. Those that are over 60, if you were to assess their, I guess, characteristics of their generation, loyalty was top 5 characteristics. So even if you didn't like the beer plant where you were working, you'd work there for 30 years because you're loyal to the company. You may not really like your denomination or even your pastor, but I'm Southern Baptist, I'm Presbyterian. So you stick with the family. And you're loyal to the, okay, here, I'll throw in. But really about 30, 40 years ago, we started to recognize that those under really the age of 50, specifically those under the age of 35 right now, loyalty doesn't even come up in their top 50 value systems. Top 5 would be like what we call meaning, which means my 2 daughters who are 22 and 20. If church doesn't make sense to them, if it's not really helping people, their value system actually says don't support. I don't care how you interpret those scripture. I'm not going to waste my money here. I'm going to go help my neighbor, the single mom. And so there literally is a battle of value systems, and neither are good or bad, right? But we've been sort of teaching, I would say, a half-truth on the tithe. We taught the consolidation, but we didn't teach them the back end of the tithe, that a good chunk of that money that was always brought in was dispersed primarily to the poor. And so right now, your average church in America that focuses on that old model and the idea that we will spend the money, we're spending 85 to 90% of all of our income on our salaries and our buildings. And so that's why we're, the fastest growing segment of Christians right now are called the dones, right? Those are people my age going, kind of done. I just want to help somebody. My church isn't reaching anybody. They're not helping anybody. Okay, so I guess that's, when Brad says you have to ask the why before the what, the why is your world is now changed. And when I'm training church planters, I say, get your seminary, your Bible education, but you better be developing a trade at the same level of intensity you're developing your biblical knowledge. Something that will sustain no matter what. Because I think a real church planter, I think a real pastor is somebody that would do it because they just can't not do it. Somehow we'll figure out a way to do this. And the reality is that our paradigm of getting a full salary is only about a 100-year-old paradigm. So just catch that. Like before the last 100 years, the gospel got to us primarily through mostly unpaid or barely paid saints. And that's why you have scriptures that talk about, double honor. Remember that one? Okay, so be nice to your pastors. Give them double honor because they're working double duty. They have to work the fields with their sons just like you do. They oftentimes would have trades, and then they also take care and they oversee the growth of the church. Okay, so to me, where we have to start the conversation is more of for you, like a paradigm change. Are you still feeling locked in by those one or two financial boxes, trying to figure out how to get at that? For me, it was, Youth for Christ. I guess I got to fundraise. Well, I didn't grow up in a church scenario for about 10 years, so I didn't really have Christian friends. So that paradigm, it only yielded about $800 a month for my whole life. So, okay, when you're raising kids, it's not cutting it. Just get people to tithe. Well, I'm ministering primarily people outside the church, so it's probably going to be good 5 years before they even trust me to talk to them about their money. Or you get called to who Jesus tends to call us to, is the poor. They're not going to throw in a whole lot, right? Okay, so to me, this is the first question is calling. I got a little bit of I guess the first time I started to go, I got to rethink this. Back in Portland, I was working for YFC full-time, but making very little money. I had to go back to a house painting trade that I learned in college. My dad was out of work for about 10 years through my middle school, through college. So we lost a really nice house in the suburbs. My mom and dad divorced. So I had to go to work full-time as a sophomore in high school to help just my mom and my daughter, or my sister, kind of make it. And so going to college, I had a partial athletic scholarship, but it wasn't enough for a private education. So I went into a paint store and just asked the guy, how do you paint a house professionally? And the guy gave me about an hour, kind of told me what I needed, and I spent my last $600-800 on this equipment. And he said, go to the richest part of Seattle, Bellevue, Washington, and put signs up on telephone poles. And it worked. I made about $10,000 a summer, which was really big money back then. So that got me through college. And went back down to Portland to enter seminary because I felt called to ministry, right? So I envisioned someday I'd be in a church, and that would be how I would make my income. And I met my wife, Cheryl. Cheryl was married when she was 18 and then divorced at 19 and a half and had a son, Ryan. And she came to faith a few years later. So when we married, I adopted Ryan. He was almost 5, and he had really severe epilepsy. So he was having 20, sometimes 30 grand mal seizures a day. So, and I knew I was supposed to marry her. I figured God would heal Ryan, and we would I still had that picture of what ministry life would be like. But his seizures got so bad, I actually had to leave seminary. I was working UPS also at nights, just trying to make ends meet off of maybe an hour of sleep, because I was always on night duty. And so I had to, one day I remember going, I just got to paint. So I dug out all the old equipment and started to hang signs on poles and started to get work. Figured I'd get back and finish seminary. I was 2 years into an MDiv. I'll get back. I'll finish it. And I still am uneducated. Was never able to get back. Ryan had a brain surgery that we had to do about a year and a half in. That was going to cost about $130,000 cash out of pocket after insurance. So I was making $800 a month through support. Painting was another couple $1,000s a month. So I thought, I'm going to be mid-20s, and I'm going to actually have to file for bankruptcy. A church that we were part of at the time decided to do a fundraiser for us. And so people were giving assets and giving trades up. So I was a painter, so I said, well, I'll throw in a paint job. And I figured some old lady would bid my job, pay $1,000, and I'd do a couple $1,000s worth of work. It ends up being this guy named Ralph, who paid $50 for my job. Pastor called me and said, hey, bad news. Guy named Ralph, he only donated $50. I'm like, well, whatever. You guys are raising a ton of money for us, so yeah, just give me his address. So I started driving up into a really rich part of Portland. It's called the West Hills. And I remember thinking, like, there's got to be a small house in here somewhere. Because, like, I just thought nobody would really pay just $50 if they had one of these big Victorian homes. Well, he did. It was about a 6,000 square foot house, 6,500 square feet. 4 stories on the back on metal stilts that went down into a big pasture of blackberry briars. And I drove by, parked my truck, and I was trying to figure out how to get out of it. And it wasn't like a negative. It was just like, I can't do this. It's going to take at least a month. We're already going to go broke. I can't stop working to do this guy's. So I thought, I'll give him his $50 back, maybe give him an extra 50, just say, hey, sorry. And as I'm having that talk, I had this weird sense in the silence that God just was saying, paint it. Paint the house. And I remember out loud I went, no, you paint it. Like, all the stuff's in the back of the truck, bro. You really... And I just sat there and really struggled. I was struggling with my calling. I was like, what are you doing? I remember thinking, what are you doing to me? Like, you're not helping out with Ryan. Now this. Like, seriously. And I eventually called Cheryl, and I thought she would be reasonable and kind of take my side. She didn't say anything. And I got mad at her. I said, so what? And she goes, Hugh, paint the house. And I hung up on her. First time ever. Well, it was actually a big brick cell phone. And then I sat there for another half hour and just really struggled with the Lord. And I had this sense, I know I'm going to do it. So I walked up, met Ralph. He was actually pretty rude to me. I said, I'm Hugh Halter. I'm from the church. I'm here to paint your house. He goes, I don't want you to hand paint my house. He goes, I don't want you to spray paint my house. I want it hand painted 2 coats. So I had all of these non-pastoral words just going through and I said, yes, sir. So for the next 6 weeks, it was me and Ralph. Ralph would try to help me because he has no friends because he's a sucker. So I was his only human that would hang out with him because I'm stuck at his house. So he'd come out and try to help me. It's totally wasting my time. His wife, Irma, would bring out these little egg salad sandwiches, way too much mayonnaise. Choke those down every day or try to throw them over the fence while she's not looking. But at the end of that, and by the way, halfway through that, I had like what I thought was going to be my final talk with God. I actually said, I'm tuning out, signing off. Apparently, I'm just a house painter to you. Let me know if you ever want me to get back into ministry. I'll consider it. That was kind of the conversation. So I literally shut down. I told Cheryl, I don't even know what I believe anymore. So we're not getting any help at any level. We're just getting losses. We were actually selling all of our furniture on eBay just trying to survive that whole season. So I just had a terrible attitude. Thought my calling was revoked. And then when I finished the job, I gave Ralph a hug and Irma kissed me on the lips. She had this mustache, I remember. But I started driving down the road, and I get a phone call, and this guy goes, hey, my name is Scott. He goes, I'm Ralph's son. Is there where I can meet you for lunch? And I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm just leaving your dad's house right now. And I said, meet me downtown, told him this little joint, and we sat down. Scott was a big developer in Portland. He would build condominiums, and he began to unpack how he gave up his faith in Jesus about 15 years prior by all of his relationship with Christian businessmen. And he goes, I just chucked it. And I said, yeah, sorry to hear that. he goes, so I don't know if you noticed, he goes, I would drive my truck up a lot and just kind of watch you paint. He goes, I know my dad only paid $50 for that job. And I was sure, I heard you were like a pastor guy. I was sure you wouldn't finish the job. And I was like, well, yeah, I'm a man of my word, you know. And I told him exactly what I told you. I said, Scott, don't think highly of me. Here's what happened. I told him about sitting in the truck. I told him how I think I've chucked at least my calling to ministry. And I said, I'm a little squirrely on my whole faith in Jesus right now, to be honest with you. And he goes, well, don't beat yourself up. He goes, just the fact that you did it. And he goes, and my mom and dad love you. Like my dad would call every day and just talk about you. And my mom just like gushes over you. And he said, I just want you to know you brought me back. And then he asked me to walk with him. Would you walk me back to Jesus? And I said, if you will walk me back to Jesus, we can team up together. But it was enough pressure. I was like, well, sure. And so we started to meet around Scripture, and Scott grew leaps and bounds. He started an organization to build houses for single moms, so I was a part of that. And we just started to see some of our friends come to faith, some other kind of carpenter dudes. Then there were people that I was working for coming to faith, and so we started a little community, and it kind of grew, and eventually we had enough people, and Scott and I kind of went, well, maybe we should start a church. Scott ended up funding a good chunk of that. Not so much my salary, but he hired me as his main painter. He said, I want you not to gouge me, but I want you to charge me top dollar. Because you've like changed my life. I want to support what God's doing with you. So we started to dig out a little bit, but we still have that huge debt. One day Scott called me and he said, hey, come down to my office. I want you to buy a condo today. And I said, Scott, look, we're doing better, but I don't have any money to buy a condo. And he goes, just come down. You're buying a condo. So I told Cheryl, like, I got to go down to Scott's office. I'm buying a condo. And Scott basically gave me a brand new condo that he just built. He said, congratulations, you own this one. And he goes, I know you need the money, so here's a for sale sign. He helped me put the for sale sign in the front yard. It sold in a couple hours, and about 10 days later, I got a check for about $110,000. And then Scott he was very evangelistic too. He was like my partner. He became our lead elder. And a church was birthed in Portland. Now, I tell that story because somewhere in there, your story exists. You've either lost faith that you're called, or you're mad at God for not making it easier, or you're wondering, where is it going to come from? And I just hope somewhere you see in that story that God is building His church. And He can do it with anybody who's dealt any pair of cards. From severely disabled son to whatever it is that God knows you and He has called you. So I will just, if you're wondering, God has called you to full-time work. But He may not pay you full-time. So settle that issue. Your money is not tied to your calling. So don't ever believe that lie. And the day is coming where more and more people will go, it's not about whether you're secular or vocationally, in your calling. It's whether or not or how you leverage all of your life into your one calling. Okay, so it's leveraging all that you have, whatever hand you've been dealt, whatever assets, whatever abilities, whatever passion. How do I get that all together so that I can spend the most time doing what God's called me to do? And so it opens it up to rethinking church. Okay, so our old model of church, it's generally brick and mortar. You have senior leader at the top that's paid, maybe a few staff, and we're getting paid to minister to the congregation, okay? We call this a chaplain model. We pay you, you do it for us. At least the big stuff, right? When we start talking about bivocational, I used to actually suggest to people inside this structure that you can still go bivo. And I actually have seen some really cool stories. One was a teaching pastor. He actually used to run a real estate company in this town. I'm wondering if it might have been this city. No, it was a smaller town, because I remember he said, like, everybody knows me in this town because our real estate company, it blesses so many people. Like, we just give a ton of money away. He goes, but then the mega church in town asked me to be the teaching pastor, so I felt like I was called to ministry, so I took the teaching job, shut down the real estate company. And we have this talk, and he comes up and he goes, I'm an idiot. I'm like, well, I'm Hugh Halter. Nice to meet you. Like, can you fill me in more? Like, what? And he tells me the story. He goes, I love teaching, like, and I'm really good at it. Like, I would teach at the church for free because I love it so much. And I said, well, he goes, so here's what I'm going to do. And he did. He called me a few months later, told me the whole story, but he resigned his money and kept his role. So he still is the primary teaching pastor. He says he spends about 10 hours. He said, I just sit in my office reading books, because that's what I thought you do as a teaching pastor. He goes, I took all my extra time and I just went back and I rebuilt my real estate company. It's doing better now than it did. So now he's making $500,000 and he's still the teaching. So that would be a story of, even within that existing structure, there are ways to actually change how you view what you do for the church and how you're compensated. I have 3 other friends right now. All of them have churches over 10,000. And I just found out, I would ask them, hey, so you take a full salary, right? And they're like, no, I haven't taken a cent for years. So how do you fund? Must be books or what? No books or whatever. All 3 of them just asked one person to sort of fund them. I thought, well, that's an interesting model. Try that. Just try that. For some people, when you think of the bivocational options, don't just think you work at Starbucks, give the church 20 hours. There are 1,000 different ways to actually put the equation together, if you will. I don't even like the word bivocational because it actually would kind of say 2, right? Work and job. I've always had 4 to 6 buckets where rain can fall. So really it feels like I'm quad vocational, or it's just, does that make sense? So just try to think outside the box. Another church that looks a lot like that is about 2,000 people. It's a great story, Tampa Underground. Well, they have, I think, 8 full-time staff now, but their staff are not pastoral staff. They ask everybody in their church to be in a missional community, so you're going to get pastored in your community. What we do is we equip you to be on mission. So if you go into their church and you go, well, basic discipleship class is, what does God put on your heart to do? And once they work people through that, and somebody said, well, I've always really I just have a passion for single moms. Great. Then meet us at the office, and you go to little cubicles, and one is a visioneering team that helps you get at your vision and helps you articulate it. And then you go to the website team. They get your little website. And then you go to their legal team, and they set up your 501c3. And then they have another team that helps you know how to cast vision and draw volunteers into that. So that's a crazy idea, isn't it? They go, our Ephesians 4, the leadership gifts are given to the body to equip the saints to do the work. So they're just taking it seriously. That's how they view their time. So that structure can operate bivocationally, although they have enough money coming in from all this that they do take full salaries. Okay? But if you're really going to do, I think probably the more realistic is maybe our story. I'll unpack it a little bit more today, but our story was basically the creation of a simple reproducible DNA. So kingdom DNA that anybody can do, whether they're paid or not. We just assumed that Jesus must have set this thing up so that anybody could do this. And even in America, when we're this busy and have 3 kids in soccer, he must have a way. And so we took that Matthew 16. If you ever want to study that, this is where Jesus says, I am going to build my church. Gates of hell will not prevail. And then he says to us, and so I will give you the keys to the kingdom. So we went, okay, we're going to try to figure out what the keys of the kingdom are. And so if you read the tangible kingdom, it tells you what ours were. And we found out every one of these is free. So we had a vertical experience. I told you Thursday nights at our house, where we did Jesus stuff, Bible stuff. Inclusive community, so we would throw a party every week. The best way to be inclusive is you just throw a party. No sneak attack, no prayer before the meal, just be human to human. That costs about $10 usually. You know, we tell everybody, always potluck, always bring whatever you want to drink. We just open up the house. So, and then, so this is things that we do to be with God, things that we do to help anybody to belong with us. And then there were things that we do to simply bless the practical needs of people. We went to us, that's the keys of the kingdom. And we found out that the DNA of the kingdom of God, by the way, the kingdom of God was the gospel to Jesus. So he said the good news of heaven is now coming to earth. You can make it tangible to people. So here are some keys to how you do that. So DNA free. But DNA has to travel into an environment or a structure where that DNA can get into the world. This classic structure of church, it can only hope that the culture, as Brad says, becomes missionary and comes to us, right? That's why we call it attractional. If you're going to really do bivocational, I don't think that's going to be the easiest for you. I think more functional is to create new structures where that DNA can go. So if you read any of the missionary thinkers, practitioners, we say missional community, okay? Somehow missional community has to become more than a small group. People on intentional mission together, that they don't wait for the culture to come to them, they actually move through the culture. So these are neighborhood or network communities. Neighborhood being proximity. Our little community in Alton that just got going, everybody lives within about 5 streets. Okay? Network would be more like what happened in Denver. Our girls are playing ice hockey. We're with those same families and those same kids 30 hours a week because it's 5 days a week. So network, we're driving all over the city, but we're with each other enough we can get some stuff done. So these communities have leadership structure, but we're just tipping it over. So where I might be leading a congregation from up on top here or from behind a pulpit, if you put me into a different structure, where do I go as a leader? Just naturally. Just watch the gravity. I'm out here now, right? And I'm a part of what we call the missionary people. So I'm not leading from up on top, I'm leading from out in front. So I have to be a modeling. This is why I honestly think God's letting this pain in the church happen, because it's going to force a lot of us who are most comfortable behind the pulpit to actually have to learn how to live this stuff. That's what I see. We're going to have to struggle with work and managing our family and then managing mission, because that's what we call our people to, right? And so I think he needs some people out in front. So we have missionary people where there's a solid line around them, because we're going to ask them to live an accountable way of life. So for us, we just said, we just want you to live a rhythm, a natural, intentional rhythm of party, of serving, and spend time with Jesus. Simple as you can do it. Try and make that a weekly rhythm, okay? And what we found is that this structure is also free. Anybody can do that. So traditional church plant funding, it goes like this. We're going to give you how many years before you have to be self-sustaining? Usually 3 years. If I were to say, if I send you somewhere in the world that's a missionary context like America, how long does it take for you to get your neighbors to even trust you? About that. Okay, so this is what happens. Oftentimes we'll start off in a missionary fashion, but by year 1.5 we're freaking out because we don't know how we're going to make up the money that the denomination gave us. Okay, so our story, we follow kind of an inverted pathway. We start by simply engaging culture with the DNA. People to people, so it's free. And then we start to multiply these communities, okay? So we're now forming communities. And that process got us to about 120 people. Okay, so it's not 1,000 people, but it was 120 people, about 4 communities, okay? And right when we said, well, let's gather them together, that's when we first went, oh, we may need some money now. So the structuring of congregation is really where you start to, because now you actually may have a little bit of a cheap rent situation. You actually are now having to develop more leaders. So we might need Hugh to have 2 nights off a week where he can actually go mentor and coach other people to lead these communities. So you start to make some adjustments that way. But when I'm working with denominations now, I think missionary engagement is how we should plant churches. Find missionaries first. And then as they've gotten to this section, then we do what we call infusion model of funding. So all that to say, sometimes when I do this talk in more church plant settings, I'll entitle the talk, How to Start a Church Without a Dime. Because I really believe, we got to 120 and there wasn't a dime spent on anything. Okay? We were really 250 before we actually started to take any. So we started taking a $500 stipend. At the max, we were just under 400 people. Okay? So this little, the story was we started one little community and we had 6 missionaries when we moved to Denver. Started to create all this space for what we call sojourners. Okay, so lots of friends happening here. Quite a few of them starting to come to faith, really in the first 18 months. And by 14, 16 months in, our house was full. We had about 50 people jammed in our house. About 35 were brand new to faith. Okay, so when the house was full, we said, well, apparently that's been good news, our natural rhythms. So let's just multiply those. So we started to multiply, and when we got to 4, somebody said, is this my church? And that's when we started to go, okay, now we have to deal with congregation. So we had to say, well, let's not change it up. Why don't we keep making the missionary community the primary organizing factor? Did you guys catch that when Brad said that this morning? Okay, primary organizing structure is really important to the Bible conversation because for most of us, that Sunday weekend structure is what holds the whole thing together, right? So if you miss a Sunday service, a lot of churches feel that big time. You can't exist without the Sunday gathering. It's where you collect the money, it's where you keep momentum. In our type of a missionary movement, the missional community is our primary organizing structure. That's what holds us together. So we don't even need a gathering. If we have a gathering, it's like, nice. But if we don't have a gathering, we don't shut down. If we have another recession or even a Great Depression again, this structure sustains. These structures fold up like cheap lawn chairs. Okay? The fastest growing movement that's ever happened in the world is happening right now in the underground Church of China. It's that model. Okay, so we may still go, okay, in America we don't have to get, but for some of you that are going, look, I'd rather not be the single leader pastor. Some people are actually choosing Bible because they go, I don't want to be that guy anymore. I don't want to be the everything man, right? I want to do what I'm good at. So they go, that model, that means I can grab a bunch of friends who are all also gifted and called, and we can all share the roles based on our gifting, and we can just do what we're good at and what gives us life, but we can actually work as a team. So this is more of a team approach. That's why the scriptures, like when it's talking about leadership, it'll give you more an idea of being overseers. So you're not the doers of ministry, you're the overseers of God's people as they're on mission. So maybe just think about that. That became that many people. Our monthly nut to pay for that was $10K. So at our height, $10,000 a month to keep us on mission and keep us gathered. That's about 1/6 of the national average. Okay, we actually realized we probably could have done it still with nothing, but people did want to gather, and we found a few places that would cost a couple thousand. We figured, though, that if we grew beyond that, we could actually stay at 10,000 unless a facility actually bumped us over that amount. So any questions? Do you see where I'm taking you? We start with Jesus, DNA's cheap. A different environment of a missionary community becomes very cheap. And then congregationalizing together also becomes way less expensive. And I would add to this is based on conversion growth. And what we found is it is far cheaper to reach lost people and create missionaries than it is to keep consumer Christians happy. Very expensive to keep Christians coming to your church. Very cheap to reach lost people. So to me, it's almost like they both have pain involved, right? They're both hard. But I always ask, pick your pain. I mean, nobody gets off scot-free, right? Like, making a disciple is hard. It takes your whole life. You're giving up tons of time. I mean, but where would you rather spend your time? Keeping those people happy and coming so you can collect a paycheck, or maybe live a lifestyle that you really have always wanted to live? So, thoughts so far just about any of this structure stuff? What time are we supposed to be done, by the way? 12? Okay. So we got about 10 minutes just Q&A this. What are you thinking? What are the tension points?
I see church planting organizations push back against this often because they tend to want to, they only understand how to build the chapel. That's what they know works.
Well, and in some contexts, they have some stats. They'll go launch large models, tend to make it better. Yeah. They do, but we also know that the conversion growth rate, I mean, it depends what you're trying to gather, okay? So, and I know some friends have launched large, and they actually have had a lot of conversion stories. But we did this kind of as a joke. We didn't mean it to be, but cost per conversion. I mean, a church in Denver we were consulting with, they asked us to come in because we're thinking about adding on to the building because it seems like no matter what we build, it fills up. So we're trying to, we'd just love to get your input. So so they were at about, let's just call it 4,000 people. And they were actually the most expensive church in Denver, had the most large givers. They had 30 full-time staff, all PhD level. So they had about a $10 million a year budget, okay? So we went, okay, how many conversions do you see every year? They said, well, not counting like junior high, high school. I said, yeah, big people. They said 4. Okay, so we went, right now your cost per conversion is about 2.5 mil, right? Okay, so tell me about this new building. How many more seats? They said, well, it's going to give us another 1,000, so we're going to grow by another quarter. So based on that, based on your numbers, and what's this going to cost? So I said, well, it's $10 million for that. And that would give you, looks like based on what God's doing here, you get one more conversion for that. So yeah, your cost per conversion is somewhere in the $250,000 to $1 million a head. And the looks on their faces was actually pretty painful. One guy started to hyperventilate. He actually started to have a panic attack. We had to calm him down and pray. And just watching one of their key elders, just like what are we, the fact that we can't see that. So sometimes these are some of the questions you still have to, if you launch large, yeah, you may have some social momentum factors that are easier for sure. You may, but the cost per that is going to be huge. They asked us, okay, so what's your guys' cost per conversion? And we were maybe 40, 45 people at the time. We said, well, we have 30 people who've come to faith, and we figure about $10 a week on food, so we're probably less than $1 per conversion. So that tells you a little bit of the difference, and maybe why God is going to keep pushing missional community. It's hard, by the way, it's hard to get people to do that, by the way. So that's why I'm saying it may not come easy unless you really find some friends and you start this way. Then I think it's very doable. That's why I tell our story. It's not a massive story, but it's, if I go, hey, could you envision 5 years from now having even a couple hundred people, with 100 of those being pretty transformative stories, and you've worked as a team with people that you love and you're all throwing in. I mean, we average, most of our team, we figured we were 20 hours a week given to help lead the church. So I was painting 30, 35 hours a week. My own community took me about 10 hours a week, so I was at about 40. So overall, probably about 60 hours a week as the church got larger and larger. But I find most pastors are still working 60 hours a week. Okay, so it's, you know, it's not easy and you're tired, but it is doable is all I want you to see. Okay? So, 5 minutes, just Q&A on this. Is it weird to you? Does it seem weird?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I'm COC, church of Christ. So like this whole missional community, like that butts up against hard on some residual legalistic stuff I have.
Yep.
So as that comes up, how do you begin to like wash that sticky residue off? Because I mean, if you're thinking you got your Jesus-y stuff and your party stuff and your service stuff, that most likely is not ever going to look like a Sunday morning gathering.
No, never really happened on a Sunday. Now, I will say this, well, you can't do it if you try to keep all the other stuff going at the same level. So where First Church, I used to spend, 25 hours on a sermon, I had to learn how to only give it 5 hours a week now. So I had to just trust the Lord if I was speaking that week. So there's a lot. You're constantly going. I can't keep up the pace. We have to trust, and we have to delegate. We have to, I have to give more time to developing leaders. Now, this is what's interesting. In this model, people would always say, okay, Hugh, especially after we started traveling and speaking, okay, how do you paint houses? How do you and lead a church? And I started to realize when I'm back home, I only gave my time to leaders and lost people. Okay, and that's a key. Sort of new strategy is not you just say yes to anybody that wants to have coffee, which is what I used to do as the single leader. Well, my job as the pastor, I just meet with anybody, and then I'm exhausted. In this setting, you got to go, nope, I work a job like everybody else, so I'm going to give, if I give my time to leaders of other communities, then they're going to someday carry the weight of 10 to 30 people, right? So I'm creating little tiny pastors, essentially, or pastor teams. And the other place I spend my time is lost people. Those are both the arenas where you get the momentum that you want. You will generally not get momentum with in between leaders or lost. In between leaders and lost are consumers. And they come and go with the wind. If you preach one bad sermon, they go try Joe's church. If you develop missionaries, you can suck for a year and they're going to stick with you because you're family. That really is the difference, is that in this model, we had 700 people come through our training process for this that said, I don't want to do this. I want to go back to church. On our website, we listed 10 really good Bible teaching churches because we didn't want to force, this is more of a missionary development model. But we said, if you really want to be a part of us, this is what we do, and this is where you won't get what you used to. I mean, we were very upfront. If you come with us, here's what you won't get. Here's where you'll feel some tension as a parent. You'll have to actually disciple your own kids now. You can't put it on us. Some parents went, that's what I want. Some went, I'm out. I don't want to do that. Okay? We said, you can't call us in an emergency unless it's really bad. We said you have to call people in your community. Okay, so there was a lot of training. So I'd say what helps you reframe everything is you just work it through with people over time. So most of our people talked about the process of learning this new way. So this would be, by the way, you know that if we have another Great Depression and this country gets locked down, do you know that we will naturally go here? You will. You will find friends in the neighborhood. And you will go, we will figure this out. So I think it's more of an opportunity to rethink this.
You and I, we've done some stuff together at Bible Corps, so I got like a 2.0 question, and I think everybody could benefit from it, would be, we've done this, but it's also getting hard at times to protect it. Was there some story along the way that as the climb really took off, that you kind of had to say, time out, you guys are trying to make this something other than what we started?
Yeah, as soon as we went public, so pre-launch was just all this great stuff. Our launch was what screwed us up. So we went public with a website and a gathering at the same time. That's why if you guys ever want to read what we did, if you want to get the book, it's called And, the Gathered and Scattered Church. that was our processes that we had to reframe now a process that we're going to take everybody through. I didn't bring any, but the TK primer, some people know us by that. That became an 8-week process that we used to take people from consumer into missionary life. So if you go on the forge.com site, probably easier right now is go hughhalter.com. You'll see the books. You'll see the "and" book. That's renovating consumers back to missionary. TK Primer is actually the tool that we use to do that with people. Okay. We had a few Bible books out there that I didn't bring a lot, but that gives you a little bit of our process as well. But I think I always thought if I just model this, everybody will do it. I now have repented of it. I realize people need baby steps into this. So if, now we work with a lot of existing congregations that are worried, look, if we really go this way, everybody's going to leave. We go, don't even tell them what you're doing. We're just going to do a little tithe pilot program by cover of night. If you have 200 people, we're going to look for 20 people, and we're going to pilot them into missional communities, and nobody else is going to know about it. And by year 2, you'll be at 20%, which is over the tipping point, which means the new way will naturally tip into the rest of the congregation. So that's our basic change dynamic, and we let everything else stay the same. But the leaders, we begin to say, stop giving less and less time to sermon prep, start giving more time to finding apostolic leaders that want to live out missionary community. So your personal time as a leader changes, but nobody really has to know about it for a long time. So just most people aren't ready for this new paradigm. So, the best thing you can do is start living it first of all, and go through the struggle yourself. Then you can coach other people that are moving in this. So, but we just moved to Alton. People always go, okay, what are you going to do differently now that you're on your 3rd go around? And I say exactly this, because it was a blast. Best 15 years of my life. Okay, and that's what's already forming in Alton right now.
You think this is only possible in church planting, or have you seen examples of churches that have been able to make this
You're never fully paradigm shifted. Even Adullam, when we went, every Christian that comes in from the old paradigm means you're not pure, right? So you're basically making disciples. So church plant, I would start a church plant exactly this way. I would not start with a gathering. I would not start with a launch service. I would start by developing missionary leaders that learn how to live missionary community. And when you get to, I'd say, 3 to 5 communities, then I would start addressing the issue of how we structure our congregation. But if I'm an existing structure, this is how I would go. I would do a 10% tithe back towards the missionary way. As soon as you plant or pilot one of these missional communities out of or inside your existing church, you're doing the exact same behavior a church planter would be doing. So to me, it's the same issue whether you're in an existing or you're starting from scratch. Starting from scratch, though, you don't have to deal with the weight of trying to keep, essentially in this setting, you're in a long side pathway of missionary development. Church plant, you can try to get everybody going the same direction. So
would you have either stated or unstated a goal of church planting with that 10%? Are you wanting to eventually?
I don't know if it honestly matters. I think God's church requires gathering and holding people together on mission, and I think it requires scattering. So if you said, I'm a part of a church of 30,000 people, we've got 1,800 missional communities all over town, I would view that the same as a church planting movement. So I don't think it matters so much how you gather. I think some people really like large gatherings, some people don't. In our setting, we liked 250 people. I didn't like it when it was 4. So some of it's almost like how the leaders like to live. And we thought, that let's just keep multiplying 100 to 250 congregational gatherings. That would have been on paper what we would have preferred, but the key, remember, all this means to get at one thing: make disciples, who are people that live on mission. So that's why I don't think your gathering is hurting you or helping you. Your gathering, I think, will be helpful for what it is, as a family gathering. But it's definitely can be, you can see how it pulls all your weight and your money and your time if you let it. So I don't think you have to let it do that anymore. So.